Gear up for risks, lift up the poorest, and clear up the skies. These are all in the new blueprint laid out in this year's 2 sessions.
Clarity and consistency of China's policies.
Healthier and stronger.
Now with another hurdle, a looming battle over trade.
Shooting yourself in the feet.
Also the challenge but the opportunity.
How can China leap through its highest hurdles and contribute to the world? Tune in to World Insight with Tian Wei for a special New Blueprint, New Contributions.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our special program, New Blueprint and New Contributions. My name is Tian Wei, the host of World Insight with Tian Wei on CGTN. The reason we are talking about the new blueprint, it is because it is a new blueprint coming from China after the 19th Party Congress and the 2 sessions earlier this year. The reason why we are saying new contributions, because it is exactly with this new blueprint that China is making contribution to the issues and challenges the world is facing. With this rich and grand topic, I am joined by 4 men with wisdom. Alistair Meahy, Chair of CCG International Advisory Council and also Secretary General of British East Asia Council. Welcome, sir. Professor Xie Tao, non-resident Senior Fellow of CCG, Professor and Deputy Dean of the School of English and International Studies with Beijing Foreign Studies University. Welcome, Professor Shou Huisheng, who is a non-resident Senior Fellow of CCG and also researcher at the National Strategy Institute with Tsinghua University. Welcome, Professor. Good to see you. Professor David Qingzhong Pan, who is the Executive Dean of Schwarzman Scholars with Tsinghua University. Welcome, Professor. Good to see you again. New blueprint. One of the things we're talking about is quality growth. China is transforming its economy, but the question is whether the speed of transformation would meet the expectations of the world. On that point, I would like to go to Professor Shou. Your point here, sir.
I have to say, at the one hand, that China always is responsive to the international pressure. And always argue through my research that China's development in the past decades has always been the response to globalization. On the other hand, I don't think the global pressure, external pressure, is the entire force to push China forward. If you look at what happened in the past few decades, China always follows its own dynamics in terms of the pace, the speed, and also in terms of which way it has to go.
All right, what is the space right now? The pace, rather.
I think we're entering into a very critical moment. China will speed up in terms of economic reform and also social development.
Is that what you have found, Mr. Meahy?
I would not focus on speed. I would focus on blueprint. The reason is that China is much misunderstood, and particularly on the issue of blueprint. If you care to read the speeches of Xi Jinping, he repeatedly in the last 5 years has used the word blueprint. That is what we should be exposing foreigners, because in there you can see where China is heading. Problem is, foreign media at the moment, all they're looking at is personalities.
Well, I think what exactly is heading is the quality growth we said at the very beginning, Professor Xie. Are we meeting the expectations both inside China and from all over the world?
Well, let me say this, there are 2 sets of expectations, when it comes to China's economic growth. One is domestic expectation. That is how ordinary Chinese people like me, are expecting the Chinese economy to perform, right? I think most of us would say it's been doing extremely well. Even though in the past couple of years we've seen some remarkable slowdown, but the engine is still on. The second set of expectations is what just my guest to my answer said, is that the international expectations of China's economy. On that side, I think there's kind of a disappointment that China should have contributed more to international economic growth. But again, let's come back to this, China is China. There's no other country that is called China. So China's trajectory of economic growth could be very different from others. And so You have your expectations, but I have my own actual conditions. So how do you try to balance between international expectations and China's own domestic trajectory? That's the challenge for us.
Interesting challenge, by the way. Professor Pan, I want to go to you. We talk about the U.S.-China trade dispute recently so intensely, every day in the headline. So isn't that a reflection, some say, of China's own transformation and the U.S. expectation? But on the other hand, U.S. should also transform its own economy. It hasn't done that, but rather export the conflict to the other side.
Okay, so back to the speed a little bit. So China's speed in the past 40 years, around the 9.5% is so high. So last year it's still high. So the China, the 12.5 trillion US dollars the GDP already. So even the speed is a little bit slowed down. It's still big increase. So the concern from the outside of China is not only speed going down a little bit, it's concern about the shaking. So they said they don't want to drop and take a lot of risk happen in China. So the China is still the engine, and this engine should be very stable. But be patient. Let's take a little bit of time to make China healthy economy, continually growth.
Got your word, patient. But can the rest of the world be patient?
Yeah,
for example, with the United States, China, and U.S. right now.
So we should tell Donald Trump to be patient a little bit. So let's,
Can you do that? Can you do that, sir?
We should pass the message to Trump. The expectation from outside the world, they try to China economy, this engine, this big engine, stable. So that's the expectation. China is to work well. Everyone is to work well. It's same as other countries. Every country should be.
All right. Is it going to catch up with the latest situation, Professor Xie? What about that U.S.-China thing?
Well, I don't know much about what is Donald Trump is thinking right now, but apparently.
Do you think anyone else knows?
But apparently the trade war is not going to happen anytime soon. One, because it takes 15 days for him to prepare a list of the Chinese products. Second, after the list is ready, he's going to post this for public comments. That takes another 30 days. So the first real tariff on Chinese products would not happen until 45 days from now.
So once again, the pace and rhythm, Professor Shou, you earlier have been talking about.
Yeah, I think there is a mismatch about the expectations from both sides, actually. The United States expects China to reduce trade deficit and then many other things, and also in terms of speed, how fast you can reduce. And I think that China also has the wrong expectation from the United States. I think that goes to an even bigger question, that China believes that the U.S. is demanding for trade deficit per se, but I don't think that's the only motivation behind the Trump's trade war, if you want to call it. High tariffs, the major targets for Trump's the main tariffs are high-tech technology improvement. And that is something way beyond the trade itself. It's not about money. It's about the supremacy of a great nation.
It is about whether competition or cooperation, Professor Pan.
It's both. So we need a cooperation first. When we're talking about the supply side and consumption side, in the U.S., the people want the products. They want the consumption. So where the consumption come from? I mean, the consumer products come from either from China or other countries, right? So they give the high tariff. Products get into the U.S. The people don't also, okay, our living standard got worse. So then there's a negotiator. Then there's a deal make. So eventually, there's a cooperation together, back to the negotiation table together, and also competitive, because that's give China also the challenge but the opportunity. We have to improve our products quality, and then to get the U.S. market over the other world market. So that's cooperation and competitive together.
But Professor Xie, here's the thing. We all internally face our own challenges, whether it's China or the United States or Europe, other countries. The question is, are you going to clean your house as efficiently as possible, while at the same time work with the rest of the world? Or are you going to export your conflicts to the rest of the world without necessarily resolving problems at home? I think that is a key issue here.
Well, it seems to me that President Donald Trump is really kind of cleaning up other people's houses before he coming back to clean up American house. look, there's a lot of troubles for America. So look at what Francis Fukuyama said: the political decay. You look at the rise of right-wing populism. You look at the strangers in their own land, the so-called white trash people, who are backlashing against American democracy. And look at the unemployment. Many of these are caused by structural factors, not really by Chinese trade surplus, right? Economists like Mr. David Dollar is here. He knows this better than probably anybody in the room. But Donald Trump is doing that. So I think, really the danger is that if you really want to export your conflicts to China, to Europe, to other parts of the world, you end up really shooting yourself in the feet. And unfortunately, it looks like, there's a rising consensus within Washington that from both the right and the left, it's time and it's long overdue to get tough on China. China has defied American expectations on market reform, on liberal democracy, being a responsible stakeholder. So look at all three fronts. China has disappointed us. We need to hit back hard on China. That's Donald Trump's phrase.
That's very consensus, yeah. But the question is, how with that long, shall I say, stored sentiment against China, that China, quote-unquote, is not meeting the American expectation?
Well, politicians do not normally think as rationally as we do, especially when we speak, They speak oftentimes, just off the cheek of their tongue, right? So I think, for Donald Trump and others, there's this temptation that, to blame China on this. I would imagine that if someday Donald Trump says, China, look, American people has finally stand up. So we need to be tough on China because China is really a good scapegoat for many problems going back there. Of course, there are other countries you can pick on. For example, Japan, you look at South Korea and others, right? But in the end, because China is so big, because China's size matters, you look at other countries, they do not really loom so large in Americans' imagination.
If the rest of the world are not working together, if this issue between China and the United States are not being sorted out in a way that both sides would accept, it seems that our international system, whether it's coming to trade or whether it's come to international cooperation after the World War II, could become a big issue for the near future. Mr. Mihi.
I think I hope as a foreigner living in China, I hope that China will, in the face of all this international instability, remain very cool and very patient, because America goes through cycles like this in its history, and it looks impossible at the moment. It looks like political gridlock. It looks like there's very unstable political leadership. My message is China must be cool, must be calm. It's got a very clear blueprint, the clearest blueprint of any country in the world going forward.
What kind of tool does China have in hand in order to guarantee that, Professor Pan and Professor Shou? Let me go to Professor Pan first.
Back to the question, China should do something very good domestically first. And then we can talk to the U.S., talk to any other countries, and tell them. And so tell everyone, and China try to do something good internally, and then try to help each other outside. I don't think there's any war, no trade war. War is the disaster war, the disaster for everyone. So we have to do something better domestically, and it'll be better in the
Professor Shou?
I think everybody agrees that China needs to do more reform and open up to make itself more healthier and stronger to respond to Trump's storm. On the other hand, I have to say really that right now the U.S. is more anxious and more upset about the bilateral relationship. So it's not really in China's hand to calm down everything. It really depends on how U.S. can adjust the whole process of a conflict and a new situation and find a better solution.
Gear up for risks, lift up the poorest, and clear up the skies. These are all in the new blueprint laid out in this year's 2 sessions.
Clarity and consistency of China's policies.
Healthier and stronger.
Now with another hurdle, a looming battle over trade.
Shooting yourself in the feet.
Also the challenge, but the opportunity.
How can China leap through its highest hurdles and contribute to the world? Tune in to World Insight with Tian Wei for a special New Blueprint, New Contributions.
Since all of you are saying, well, on the one hand, China has to do its own thing well, probably even better than it used to be. On the other hand, we have to observe closely as to how the other party of the tango is doing their own dance, namely the United States. So let's focus on China's own agenda. The next 3 years, China has this blueprint. 3 goals, as we say, the tough battles, according to the 19th Party Congress and the earlier 2 sessions: environmental protection, poverty alleviation, reduce the risks in the financial sector. The 3 tough battles. Can China do well? Let's have a vote here among our panelists. Can China do well? Are we going to win? You don't want to vote? Okay.
It depends on how you phrase the question.
There we go. It's a democracy here on the panel. So tell us what qualities would help China to win these 3 battles. Professor Xie, you raised the microphone.
Let me just borrow the slogan from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They say their motto is lean, green, and clean. So I think that pretty much summarizes the 3 major battles ahead for the Chinese top leadership. Lean includes a lean government. Clean means environment, Green also includes environment, but also there's something more to that. That's sustainable development, energy conservation, water conservation, and others. So I think really it's about lean, clean, and green. And I believe, on the environment front, it's probably going to be much more difficult than we expected. But on the anti-corruption and making a clean government, I think, we're doing a much better job. And so I think, the president and his team is really meeting the rising expectations of the Chinese people. In terms of clean, you look at other, for example, look at GDP and others, I think we're doing not as good as other jobs, but I think, there's still much room for us to catch up with.
But these are the things exactly China is working on. Professor Pan, from an economist's perspective, how do you think that battle is being fought so far?
So far so good. So like last year, the last few years, China has lifted over 68 million people out of the poverty. So we are still fighting on that. So that's, we have a lot of policies for the local government that try to help the people, and a lot of work done. Our Tsinghua students, every summer, they go outside of a campus and see the inland China and see the poor areas. And they can see in the past years, the growing so fast. And also the students make a lot of contribution on that. That's the poverty areas. So you can see the government, how strong the government work on that. Our students, after our students come back, I'll give you an example, and the students said, oh, wow. So they travel around the whole world. This is China local government is so strong. And they do something, and they implement something very efficiently and very effectively. So I feel very confident to fighting that, and as well as the pollution. But one thing we have to be a little bit careful about the risk. We put a lot of efforts, the regulatory committee, right? The insurance and the banking and the security. We try to avoid, like 10 years ago, there's the financial crisis, but China should face that challenge.
Clear goal, implement, bang, bang, bang. However, on the other hand, it could also work the other way around. For example, local government debt. For example, the involvement of government into the business operations. So, Professor Shou, your thoughts?
Well,
you voted yes.
Yes, I am positive because I have a whole book actually explaining why.
Can you sum it up just in 1 minute, the whole book?
Yeah, the main argument is that China is capable of changing from one stage to another stage, and that's something quite significant if you compare it to many other regions. And so the whole argument is that China somehow has this amazing ability to upgrade its institutions, and we all know that institutions matter for a country to have a sustainable development. But if you look at China's development in the 1990s beyond, it's always focused on growth, and then from 2000s began to focus on the social issues, inequality, poverty reduction. Right now it's pollution, right? And so it moves from growth to the social issues, social development, right? This is a huge change, and you don't see many countries ever did that successfully. And my argument is that somehow China, and actually I would argue this is the East Asian thing, that those countries are capable, for whatever reasons, they are capable of upgrading their institutions to have for long-term.
That sounds quite mysterious, what you just said, Professor Shou. Somehow, but the question is how, right? It's not somehow, but rather how.
Are capable of have a consensus among in the society and in the leadership to change the ability to convince everybody this is the goal we have to meet, and is able to do that.
Bring the consensus. Is that the thing?
China's already winning in the green issues. It's already the global leader in wind power. It's already the global leader in solar power. It's already the global leader in electric vehicles. I would say there's strong indicators because of the clarity and consistency of China's policies. It is going to overturn and upturn two major global industries. One's the automotive, and the other is the energy industry. China is going to really win big time.
But the thing is, while China is doing that, is it really contributing to the world's solutions to solve these problems?
Yes, because we've got to have, we need to get rid of the combustion engine. It's causing pollution all across the world. Yeah, the solutions are there, coming through with electric vehicles. So it is going to contribute hugely to growth.
All right. All of these goals, whether it is environmental protection or alleviation of extreme poverty or reducing the financial risks for a more financially stable society, these are all, in a way, matching up with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. But having said that, though, it should be China's contribution. But on the other hand, Professor Xie, people look at this and say, what does China want to do? Is China trying to have a dominant role in our world by suggesting that it is already taking a leadership role on these various fronts?
People all have perceptions and misperceptions. So when you look at America, its trajectory of growth, right? For many years, it was industrializing. You look at, back in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Look at read Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle and others. You do not really want to visit Chicago back in the early 20th century. Look at the meatpacking industry. That was terrible, right? And so China is basically following in the footsteps of the early industrialized countries. And so we already, seems like we are passing through that stage. So we were coming to this industrial restructuring. America is now in this service high-tech stage, and China is kind of going through industrialization 2.0 point, right?
Right.
And so what I want to say really is that every country has to go through this stage by stage. And there's no way you can really jump through that. So coming back to China, China needs to develop before China can really come back and take care of this. Americans spend about 30 years cracking down on environmental pollution. Los Angeles used to be as terribly polluted as Beijing today is. And so I think we need to be a little bit more optimistic about the future of China.
We all remember the book Silent Spring, of course. That's very much related to what you have just talked about in history. Some thoughts from you very briefly, Professor Pan?
I think Los Angeles is still terrible. There's the traffic and the polluted. Yeah, so it's a dynamic process. So it's not a fighting immediately like this. So there's, for pollution, for everything, so we have to continue doing that. So we're getting better and better and better. So let's make a contribution, as you mentioned.
You guys have been talking a lot, and you voted yes. But the question is whether what you have just said would convince our audience or not. So can I have a bigger survey here? Do you think these four guys are convincing enough that will make you think China is going to win those 3 battles within 3 years? Yes or no? Very supportive. Thank you so much. Okay. Now let's focus on the grand issue, which is, what about the world? Of course, it sounds so big. But the question is, will China's solution really provide an alternative? Community of shared future, that's a grand phrase coming from Chinese President Xi Jinping. That's a vision he has provided as an inspiration for the rest of the world. But how to interpret it? And will it function as immediately as possible so that we can solve some problems? That is the issue.
There's a tough question. Because I would say that China is providing a different choice in terms of how to solve those problems, how to push the world forward. And I think China has been doing pretty well in that sense to give the world a different way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mihi?
I don't think that there are foreigners who are talking that with the rising confidence of China, that China now intends to export its system of government. This is, I don't think, anything remotely close in the minds of the Chinese government.
What is close to the mind?
I think if you, Xi Jinping in his international speeches particularly repeatedly says, let us have mutual respect, mutual understanding. So each civilization is different. Let's respect each other's civilizations. That is surely the way to a more peaceful, sustainable world.
Will understand do the job? Professor Pan?
The community and the shared, I think, is the two key words. So there's a big question, but let's think in a small way. So like our neighborhood, right? So we have some delicious food. We want to share to others, right? So this we can share everything I have. You share everything you have. You have a spicy food, I have the sweetie food. We share each other. So like a whole community in the whole world. So the China has, you say, oh, China has a very large, the number one steel maker, and the number one is the coal maker, number one the clothes maker. Everything is the number one. But you say, oh, you have the supply side reform because the supply side is too much, and you want to give less the stuff to our countries. Absolutely not. So, you know, I have a delicious food, bake delicious food. I don't share with somebody else. You need that, right?
You know, Professor Pan, you really sound like a Chinese. When you use analogy, go with the food. But Professor Xie, what about your thought?
So here, let me be a little bit more cautious about China's international presence. Okay?
Go ahead, sir.
So I just read in David Lake's presidential speech at the American Political Science Association, he called this international legitimacy. And he was talking about the United States of America. But I think that the logic that he was talking about absolutely applies to China. So one is that if China really wants to lead or to offer leadership, let me say, offer leadership, China does not necessarily want to lead the world. But China wants to contribute its own wisdom, let's say. And you have to think about, number one, is there broad performance legitimacy? That is, by trading with China, by working with China, we're going to bring significant economic benefits to other countries. That's performance legitimacy. Second, if China set up international institutions, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, are you going to make decisions in a way that is procedurally legitimate? And so that even though China is big, China has veto power, but other countries perceive that China's decisions are legitimate. Number three, whether China can really promote and offer an alternative ideology, different from liberal democracy, but focusing on human development and diversity and harmony, that yes, we are different, but even though our differences do not necessarily mean that we have to be enemies. Unfortunately, this is kind of a mentality right now in Washington, D.C. Because you are different, and therefore you are my enemy. Okay? So I think those are the 3 points that Chinese leadership really wants to think about in the future when China becomes not just a global actor, but it become a global power.
As we said, for 40 years already since reform and opening up, filling the stones while crossing the river, right? All these answers that you have just asked about probably could only be figured out as we are going forward. About big power relations, China wants to have this new type of big power relations. Professor Xie, has China's handling and actions over the past few years, let's just say, since China raised the concept of community of shared future, in any way help us to understand what exactly China means?
In my view, President Xi Jinping said this because he really kind of envisions of a world of grand harmony, like Datong. But many foreigners interpret this as kind of a China-led international system, very much like Pax Americana. And so we're going to going back to the old Chinese tributary system, this Pax Seneca, right? So that's kind of scary to Americans, And Americans think, hey, wait, we call this, America's Pacific Century. And now you're going to take over the mantle and become the leader. Because any international order, you have to think about hierarchy, about superiority and inferiority, about authority and legitimacy.
So should China care about others' concepts
Well,
and
we don't
perceptions?
say this, but obviously when other countries look at Chinese leaders' rhetoric, even though, let's say, we earnestly say we only intend to rise peacefully, we would never attack any country, but in international relations, how can you be sure that your promise today will be counted tomorrow?
That's
right?
my question to you.
Right?
Professor.
And so it's very hard, So you go to some parts of the world, people really have some deep-rooted suspicion or resentment, I would say, about China. And you know which country I'm talking about. And so really, like my guest said, China needs to do a much better job of telling a good story to other people. What we are
Telling
doing,
a true good story.
I think the best story is a true story. Yeah.
It's a clever way to tell the story. It's an important thing. Your question about big power relationship is hugely important. Chinese people need to put themselves in the shoes of Europeans and Americans. In the last 40 years, China has industrialized at a speed and scale that's unprecedented in human history. Europeans and Americans are in a state of fear and shock with this because it's happened so fast. They don't understand it. They're worried. Their perception of the world as they feel it should be is suddenly changing because massive shifts in power and politics and economics has come to Asia and particularly China. So what is crucial, what my learned colleague here said, is China must get super smart how it tells its story.
Get super smart telling the story. We also got some super smart questions coming from the audience for all of you here on the panel. Shall we have maybe the gentleman on the very front line, because these are the people that we have got to know over the years. What about Mr. Dollar?
So just listening to the last set of comments, it does strike me that the panelists have accurately characterized that there's a very hostile attitude toward China in Washington. It's what we call inside the Beltway. But I think they're missing the point that the vast majority of Americans do not share this attitude. We just had the China Development Forum here, and there were all these top CEOs from Europe and the United States. You didn't hear any of this hostility. Basically, what you heard was a tremendous amount of excitement about technological change and economic dynamism in Asia. A little bit of concern that China could open up more quickly, so there are a lot of these firms are looking for business opportunities. But basically, there's a lot of appreciation of win-win economic cooperation, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of that.
I'm really thrilled to hear him say that there's a positive attitude to China in Middle America. I can't speak about America, I can speak about Europe. I mean, this here is a headline out of the Financial Times last week, which is backlash grows over Chinese deals for Germany's corporate jewels. This is very typical of the very negative growing feelings in Europe, which is very dangerous. I keep coming back. China must become super smart about it tells its story.
Okay. I hope they respond in a way to what David just said. Some thoughts also coming from Henry Hui Yao here.
I think this is excellent discussion. But I think also probably, as we said, the new global governance, so China actually wants to maintain and also to supplementary and also to support the new system. So I think the new global regional, particularly the economic governance, like TPP, RCEP, FTAP, China and the US and other countries should really active, including Europe. So I think probably on that end, I agree that we should have a new direction to work on.
Professor Xie.
Last year, I said something like this, between US and China and any other big powers, there should be kind of a new concept. I call this shared responsibility, differentiated leadership. So look, Israel is pretty good at agriculture, right? China is pretty good at solar panels and others. Americans are pretty good at high tech. And so why don't you just have this kind of division of labor? But we all have shared responsibility. for the improved global governance, right? Second point, let me quick up.
No planned economy, by the way, Professor.
Oh, no. Second, I think both countries, China and the United States, need to understand that every human society progresses because of learning and adaptation. It seems to me like China has done a much, much better job in terms of learning from the West, adapting into a new environment, much better job than Washington has done. I think, Washington, many Americans, maybe except David Dollar and the lady here, live kind of their own bubble that is called liberal democracy. I think, to borrow from Karl Marx, maybe liberal democracy has become kind of opium for some people. That's why they are using this attacking Chinese. I'm not against the democracy.
So your point is what? What is your point?
My point is that Washington needs to learn from China just as we have been learning from America, from Europe, from any other country.
This is really a changing world, so we have to find new solutions towards each other, not to use the word like trade war or trade. I'd like to use the trade competition. I mean, the relationship between China and the United States has been on a competitive way. It's very different from the previous one. Right. So we should have a new vision towards each other. We should have a new road to go ahead.
That's the inspiration coming from Professor Tang, the new solution, the new way of thinking.
Although I'm a little bit worried about the coming great power competition in the next few decades, but overall I'm still optimistic about the future because we are different from like 19th centuries. As long as countries, a few months ago I wrote a short piece in FT Chinese, and the title is that what America urgently needs is not American first, it's a reform and open up. Well, that actually, when I talk about that, I'm talking about China as well. For both U.S. and China, there's no alternative. What we needed to do is to reform, change ourselves, and open up, and continue to push forward. As long as we do that, and there are always the area of cooperation.
I'm from the U.S.
Okay, go ahead.
Interesting discussion. I'm wondering, even if we craft these compelling stories about China, how do you get the average American to listen?
Professor Pan, briefly.
Thank you. So I fully agree with your comments. We need more communication, understanding, cooperation, and a win-win situation. We should do that step by step. So, and also we need a Western voice to tell the stories. We need everything to go outside to tell.
All right. Take the time, but our time is running up. Gentlemen, for now, I want to express my deep appreciation on behalf of CCG and CGTN for all of you present here and sharing with us your thoughts. David Qinzhong Pan, thank you. Professor Shou Huisheng, Xie Tao, and Alistair Mihi. Gentlemen, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.